Hi, welcome to ICTBC, our virtual book club. I'm librarian Racine.
I'm librarian Sarah.
We're so glad that you could join us today. Today we're talking about Station 11 by Emily Mandel. Now, this book is about so many things. It's about this actor Arthur Leander and his life. It's about his first wife, Miranda. It's about Kirsten. I forgot her last name.
Raymond.
Kirsten Raymond and her life. And it's about a plague that hits the world and ends life as they know it. But it jumps back and forth before and after the plague, and it's this swirling story. So, you know what?
The whole thing.
It's such a rich story. You won't care that we've talked about points. I mean,
I read it twice because I was preparing for this, and I went back and there were so many things that I forgot, and I was just moved again by the language and the different plot points and the different themes that appear throughout this whole book. So even though we're going to spoil a lot of the different things that happen in the story, if you haven't read it, be sure to go and just take care of
grab
that,
a copy of it.
It's so good.
And here's the thing, when people say, when you hear rich, when you hear detailed, no, this thing reads like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just get sucked in. And sorry, I'm on a diet. I was trying to think, if this book were dessert, it would be like tiramisu with like a layer of that chocolate stuff, that the bonbons. I mean, it's just rich. So anyways, I hope you enjoy our discussion about it.
Okay.
Well,
so like Racine was saying, it is about so many different people, and it follows the story of the end of humanity. I mean, there's a plague that wipes out 99% of the population on the world, and then what happens after, and what happens to humanity, and it goes beyond just what happens to humanity, but how does it survive? What happens to our history, our art, all these things that we have every day that we take for granted.
One of the ways it does that, I think, it's the story of Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
She travels with a group of actors who go around and act out Shakespeare plays. Right. And it's funny because they tried doing other plays, but that didn't work because Shakespeare went better. People wanted Shakespeare. It was familiar, yet it was not. It was something, they're little pockets of humanity that they're traveling to bring them art.
Right.
And it was wonderful.
It's half Shakespearean actors, and half symphony. So they preserve Shakespeare and all of these plays that we're all so familiar with. I mean, Shakespeare is redone and redone and redone, and I think we take that for granted sometimes. But also this music, it's both very much the Shakespeare and the symphony orchestra, because that's what they are. They're a bunch of orchestra musicians that happen to survive a plague together. So
all right, why is this story different than any other dystopian kinds of books? I mean, there's World War Z.
Right.
There's The Stand. The Stand, Stephen King, everybody's wiped out by the flu.
Right.
How's this one different?
I think because of the focus. I think that it's very much a story about not just how we survive, but what that survival looks like. It's a character-driven novel. It focuses on these different pockets of humanity and these different people that represent so many different tropes. I don't want to say tropes, but like different kinds of people, different characters personified by these characters in the book. So it's about the survival of art, about the survival of history. It's about regret. It's about so many other things than just, it just happens to be set right after a plague. I mean, it's a setting instead of the point of the novel.
Yeah, well, and
what do you think?
And I think that's one of the things that makes this book so different than a lot of other books. I mean, it's really ambitious because what they're doing is she's pulling in all of these themes, and it's like, wow,
Right.
that can be a con, because
think
it's
that-
tough to focus on all these things. But I think
she does a really good job.
she does a really good job, because she's focusing on Arthur, and Arthur dies, just
Oh, yeah.
boom, right at the first of the play.
That's how the whole thing starts.
And he's acting in Lear, and Kristen, the girl that goes on to act in Shakespeare later on in her life, she goes through these houses, she's scavenging, and she's looking for mentions of Arthur or his wives in these gossip magazines. She's looking through people's
Yeah.
magazines in their houses.
She scavenges for Us Weekly.
And it was funny because we were talking about this, why would she, be fixated? She was 8. Arthur was 51 when they were acting in King Lear. And I was telling you that it was the Dean effect.
The Dean effect. Remind me.
When I was
the Dean
going into
effect.
kindergarten,
Yeah.
I told my mom, I was like, no, I don't want to go into kindergarten. I want to marry Dean, who was my brother's friend, and he was like 20. Or I wanted to go into the 5th grade. And it wasn't that I had a crush on Dean. It was just I admired him so much that it was like, Dean rocked. And I think that's the way Kristen was with Arthur. And it's funny because Arthur gives her a paperweight.
No, actually, he doesn't.
Oh, sorry.
The paperweight is something that appears and just kind of peppers the novel. It's just a paperweight that has a clouded image or something in the middle of it, and it's pretty. And it goes from, Clark gives it to Arthur, who, when Miranda takes it, then she sends it to Arthur, but he gives it to Tanya, who then gives it to Kristen. And so...
And it's like many, many, many years.
yeah, she has
And-
it 20 years later.
Yeah, well, and originally Arthur does give her the graphic novel of Station 11.
Oh, right.
And so that's something that Kristen carries as a talisman, kind of.
Yes.
She carries it from the beginning of the plague onto the, on from there on. She even keeps it in the library so it won't get damaged or lost.
Oh, yeah, at the very end she gives it so that somebody will always have a copy of this thing. We've got some comments coming in. Let's see here. Different than The Stand, because evil is not mystic. It's entirely prosaic. I actually did not read Stephen King's The Stand, so I can't speak to that. But thanks, Noelle, for that comment. And Stephanie felt that it was a unique way to tell a post-apocalyptic story, and I would agree with that 100%. I think that's what makes this novel so rich and interesting, is that it's different, because we have so many apocalyptic stories out on the market today, and this is slightly different in a way that's new, and it kind of makes everything interesting and fresh. Suzanne says, I read Station 11 in one day while traveling. It was an amazing novel. And yes, I think that it's, so interesting and rich, but it is such a fast read. I mean, I reread it, and I reread it like that.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us. I love those comments. Keep them rolling in.
Well, and Noelle brings up something that we were talking about in this. And there's this theme of they have religion, kind of. There's a character in this named the Prophet. And he's almost this, like, harbinger of doom.
Very much.
If you're talking about the villain of the story, it's the Prophet. And talking about how when there is, like, faith in this book, it's kind of shown in a bad light.
Very much.
And
he always says, everything happens for a reason. We're the light. He says that a lot, too. And he was making a reference to the fact that they all survived. Because, it wiped out 99% of humanity. So there are pockets of civilization left. And he would say things like, we survived because we're strong. Everybody else that died was weak. And, not just that they caught a virus and had the short end of that stick, but that these people that survived were somehow better instead of just incredibly lucky.
yeah, well, and I don't know. I was looking at it and I was noticing those kinds of things that the Prophet was saying, but I think it's almost one of those things where I think she's taking Shakespeare and art and beauty, and the people that are surviving well are the people that are using those to base their faith on.
Shakespeare
Just throwing it out
is
there.
our new
Well,
religion? Is that what you're...
maybe.
Art is
Because,
religion.
yeah. Because they're performing and that gives people hope. I mean, I don't know.
If you've got an idea on this, please do chip in, because I think that's another great thing about this novel is that there's a lot of different ways to interpret things because it's just layer after layer and so many things are woven in. It's a very complex book, but in a very good way.
Well,
definitely.
And talking about that, what was it? They keep quoting Star Trek.
Oh yeah,
I was
love
like,
that.
oh my
I
gosh.
thought it was so cool. It was...
Survival is insufficient.
Glad you said it because I keep wanting to say inefficient, which is a completely different take on that. But,
They're efficient
yeah.
in surviving, but
they're efficient in surviving. But survival is insufficient because that's what it is. They've done it. They've survived, and now they're bringing back Shakespeare and music, and there's the museum that we haven't even talked about, and there's a librarian who writes newspapers in one pocket of civilization because, you know, when you're trying to bring civilization back from the brink, what do? You start a library. So.
well, and thinking of other kind of post-apocalyptic stories.
Yeah, too.
Like The Evil Dead.
Okay.
Walking Dead.
Yeah. We had talked about that too, how it was so, you're zombies and it's very intense, and
it seems like they're trying to find the pieces of humanity in Walking Dead, and it's like, it's so pessimistic because humanity's just splintered.
Yeah.
And in this book, it's like she's knitting the pieces of humanity back together again. It was beautiful.
I think that is really beautiful.
And I do have faith that humanity could like pull it out. Call me Pollyanna. Call me naive. This was one of those stories where it's like, yeah, this is the different viewpoint on humanity and how we could pull back the pieces and make it work.
We've got a couple extra comments. Joe Ellen says, what age group do you think that this book is appropriate for?
That's a good one.
I would say that...
I would say it would be young adult. I mean,
I think that there are
16 and
definitely.
up, and I think they would find things that would really resonate with them because it's all about these different questions that young adults are thinking about. What is, it has, that was another theme that I thought about this book, isolation and people.
Oh yeah.
There's lots of themes of isolation and how we connect with others.
Definitely.
And, Miranda's the first wife of Arthur, and the reason why they connect so much is because they grew up on this island, like off the coast of Canada. It's fictional, but it's isolated.
Delano.
I call it Delano because I'm from Wichita. Yay, Delano! And it's like this hippie commune, and people go there and they live kind of, alone. And Arthur isn't one of those people that likes to be alone. He loves people. He loves to connect. He becomes an actor. Mm-hmm. And Miranda grew up on the island. She's 11 years younger than him. Did you catch that?
I did.
And she writes the book Station 11.
What?
I know.
I did not get that.
So I think these are things that young adults would really tie into on this story. Absolutely. I mean, and it's a different viewpoint. We've got the Hunger Games. We've got, the World War Z.
I was going to say what's the other one that just came out? They just finished it. Divergent.
Yeah.
I mean, all these dystopian books, and there are a lot of things that they have, and this provides something that's a little bit different.
And I'm curious if there's anybody out there that's read other books that I'm thinking particularly to Oryx and Crake by
Atwood.
Atwood. I think this is the next book that I need to go to because, it's women in these views of dystopian futures. I mean, it's usually it's the men's story. So let's have some gender equality in telling these stories.
For sure. Suzanne says that she appreciated descriptions of everyday things the characters ended up missing terribly and feeling nostalgic about, like city lights seen from an airplane. And I think that ties in a lot to the Museum of Civilization. I think that's a good way to head next in this discussion, because the museum is a place in this airport. So people who survived this plague ended up at an airport in Severn City, where I don't remember where it is, somewhere up in the Midwest, north.
I was trying to figure out if it was Lake Michigan or
Ohio was south
next
at that point, right?
Yeah,
and they said
or
they went
Lake
too
Erie,
south.
Superior.
And they collect things that are no longer really relevant in society anymore. iPhones, credit cards, driver's licenses. There's a pair of 4-inch stiletto heels that somebody put in the museum. There's car engines. And so these things that are so meaningful to us now that we can't imagine our lives without, these people are doing it. It's not even a question anymore. They are just... It has become a place where we revere these things, but we remember them as relics of our past. So it is interesting. I think that was something that resonated with me quite a bit.
Yeah, well, and I think this was one of those, we were talking about oral histories.
Oh, yeah.
And how we preserve history. And, some of the people in the book have shunned history. Mm-hmm. They don't want to remember what was before. They just want what came after. And then there's others that are dedicated to preserving the history and telling the stories. Well, this book almost reminds me, it's like a modern day oral history, where it's like the next oral history that they would be telling their kids. You can't, if you tell a history, you got to make it personalized somehow. And they're not going to have the whole story because there's no news.
Right.
So maybe they're telling the story of Arthur and Miranda and Kirsten. And because there's characters, and Jeevon, because there's characters that pop up again and again in this story, and it's kind of interwoven in that regard. So you don't have different characters that you have to remember. You make it more archetypes. Mm-hmm. This is that person, that Jeevon is that person who appears over and over again and serves that purpose.
Absolutely. I think because another criticism that I've seen is that the story is a little too neat in that regard. That, Jeevon just happens to be there when Miranda's having her little breakdown and she needs to borrow a cigarette. And he's there, and he happens to be the one that takes a picture and interviews Arthur. And so there's all these places where he appears, and that seems very neat. But I think that when you think about it, and he is this archetype of a character, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I really like that interpretation of it. And then we were also talking about oral tradition, the school at the end of it, because there's a school in the airport, and that's all oral tradition, because that's all that really got left. I mean, it's not like they have textbooks that they keep in the airport. And then there was something else I wanted to mention while you were talking about that. Oh, because there's another theme that pops up a lot, and it's, is it better to remember, or is it better to not have known? Because there's a lot of children that are being born in this new era, and they don't know. They know what their parents have told them, what their community people have told them, and so it's kind of like an airplane. They don't. What is an airplane? What, really? That giant piece of metal flew through the sky? Somebody says, well, you'll run off and join the circus. They're like, well, what's a circus? I mean, they don't know. There's all these things that they just don't know. And so is it better to know how it used to be and then kind of see where we're going, or is it better to not have known at all? I don't know how I would feel. I think I might, I don't know, ignorance is bliss, but at the same time, there's a place for history. I don't know.
Tell us what you think in the comments below. We'll continue this conversation. And
Are we running out of time? I can't see what our timeline
I think
is.
we're getting close to being out.
I know.
but-
There's just so much to talk about. But let's just do this since Noelle joined us. Noelle says, I'm not a sci-fi reader in general, so it's interesting to me that this novel pulled me into a genre I wouldn't normally pick up. And I think that's a really, really good point. I'm glad Noelle brought it up. That this is normally, I mean, we shelve it with our science fiction, but it's very much an atypical science fiction novel because it doesn't have, everything in it is very real.
I think the author herself said that there was no science in it, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's
But, it's...
very realistic, like, because a giant plague could come and wipe out humanity, and we could live in an airport. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have any.
This
aliens
almost
or
goes into a new genre. Have you heard of cli-fi?
climate fiction.
Climate fiction, where people are speculating on what's going to happen to our Earth. Now that we've changed it so much. I think of The Bone Clocks by Mitchell. That's a book that really typifies, the Earth changing and what are the repercussions for life on Earth. So I think it almost goes into that kind of thing.
And before you do this, I know what you're doing.
Okay.
I just want to point out that we've talked about a lot of books throughout this discussion, books that we haven't really maybe gone into depth, but we are going to create a record set, which doesn't really probably mean much to you, but we're going to put out
We've got
book
a list that we're going to put.
that we're going to share on our social media and in other various avenues so that we can so that if you like this book and it speaks to you and you want to read other books like it, that you can. So we'll have all kinds of read-alikes in the comments, on our social media, check our Twitter page. And so with the further ado, hey, Racine, what book are we going to read next month?
Louise Penny's coming to town. Whoa! So, Still Life. I'm going to read Still Life.
We decided
She's-
to do Louise Penny as an author instead of a specific title. So if you've read Louise Penny, if she's somebody that you've wanted to pick up one of her books. It is a whole series. Inspector Gamache. It's French. I don't speak
Gamache.
French. But anyway, we're going to read Louise Penny as an author. So I'm going to read A Trick of the Light. Racine's going to read A Still Life, which is the first one in the series. And if you've ever read her, join our discussion next August. Stephanie, do you happen to have that date pulled up?
I think
It'll be
I
the
can.
second
tuned.
Wednesday.
10th?
Is it the 10th?
I'm finding out.
Second Wednesday of August, 12:30. We'll go ahead and do it over the lunch hour again. But if there is a time that works better for you, please do let us know.
Yeah.
Because we are hoping that this format leaves us pretty flexible to try to reach the most people that we can.
Send us
And-
comments.
Yeah, send us
We love
comments.
to talk books. Hey, I'm Racine,
I'm Sarah.
and thanks for joining us today for ICTBC.
Hashtag ICTBC. Oh, I got it this time. Okay, bye guys.